nous allons entendre cet après-midi le professeur Yvan Boldiret. Alors, j'avais noté à l'École des hautes études de sciences économiques de Moscou,
aussi,
toujours vrai, mais qui nous vient aussi de Berlin et qui, comme je l'ai dit ce matin, a fait un superbe livre sur Ernst Bloch et ses contemporains, qui est une véritable encyclopédie de cette époque, mais aussi des courants à la fois philosophiques, esthétiques et littéraires, d'ailleurs, de cette période, et qui est un livre que je vous recommande si vous travaillez sur Bloch, mais globalement sur cette période de la philosophie allemande. Donc, nous sommes très heureux de l'entendre nous faire un compte-rendu finalement de ce livre, dont nous n'aurons que des bribes finalement, mais sur la resignification de l'utopie chrétienne. Merci beaucoup d'être là.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je dois me remercier aussi. Merci beaucoup à Svetlana et à vous, Mylène, de m'inviter. Je vous demande pardon de parler anglais. I just want. I was thinking about what could I present? What could I present today? And I thought, well, perhaps I will share with you some ideas on what it is to do Bloch studies today, generally. Then I will try to develop some thoughts pertaining to my book, but also transcending and going beyond what I try to do in the book, so it doesn't substitute the book, because it's impossible to summarize the book even in an hour. Although some ideas I would like to present in part because they are relevant to what has been said today. And of course, I will be happy to answer with any questions pertaining to the book or to Bloch or whatever. Okay. Now, first of all, the key issue with dealing with Bloch in philosophical academic context can be characterized by Bloch's own words. Something's missing. Etwas fehlt in German. What does it mean? During his life, Bloch had a very problematic relationship with academic philosophy. He was an outsider in Germany in the beginning of his career, when there was a huge neo-Kantian and phenomenological movement to which he could not really he could not really be a part of it, as well as Benjamin and Lukács, by the way. In the 30s, obviously it was impossible, and he had to flee to the United States, where he lived in a complete isolation without being able to speak English really. And but it was not by chance that the only invitation he got after the war was from Eastern Germany, not from the Western one. Because the Western German academia, we have to know that, was very rightist. It was very rightist. It was Ritterschule, which was conservative. It was Schelsky and Luhmann, who hated Bloch in a way, or could not. And even Adorno, when it came to inviting Bloch, to giving him, I don't know, visa invitation to the States, when it was the question of life and death, by the way, declined to help. So it was really, even the leftist friends were somehow abstaining from Bloch. They didn't like his perspective very much. They could not really integrate it into their own thinking. In 1961, when Bloch fled to the Western Germany, I just wanted to tell you this story because I think it is important. You have to know that. In Tübingen, where he was very old, but he needed a professorship to earn his living. He was very old. He was 74. It's incredible. and he wanted to secure academic position. And in Germany in 1961, the philosophy professor at Tübingen were not happy by having Bloch at their faculty. They were, they were ambiguous on that. I don't know. I think that, again, the post-war landscape of the German academia was completely different. It was about, well, hermeneutics, sort of Heideggerian thinking very much, and, well, Sprachpragmatics in terms of Apel. Habermas was gaining importance at that time. So it was not that possible for Bloch to really emerge as a part of the Western German academia. So he was given a guest professorship, a permanent guest professorship, which is a bit crazy, but it's a Cold War phenomenon, which is coming back today, I should say. A lot of Russians are in this, or some Russians in the state get this permanent guest professorship. So, but it was still a guest professorship. It was not a real professorship. Until the death of Bloch, he didn't have a real professorship, apart from Leipzig, from this short period in the totalitarian country. And nowadays, in Germany, no philosophers, or almost no philosophers, are interested in Bloch. But who is interested in Bloch? Who does Bloch studies? Sociologists, political theorists, cultural scientists, anthropologists, geographers. In geography, human geography, Bloch is an extremely popular person. And of course, utopian studies as an interdisciplinary field, which is also, Bloch is a classic there. But we see that and he was unable to fit the academic or philosophical whatever standards. Germans, people who do German literature, of course, they refer to Bloch a lot. And in fact, in Germanistic, Bloch is much more well known. But again, it's German literature. And German people who do German literature do literature, not philosophy. And it's, of course, Bloch does write prose. And this is, I wanted to show this, not that extensively as I wanted to do that, but still, I wanted to show this in my book as well. That he was writing literature, basically. He was writing essays, and literature played an enormously important role in his work. I will come back to that as well. But still, he had philosophical ambition. He was going to do philosophy. So we see that again. Bloch is today, for example, Bloch is overshadowed clearly by other representatives of the critical theory and of the Frankfurt School, like Benjamin Adorno and Lukács. And that was one of the motivations behind my book, to show that Bloch was a part of this more general context, very interesting, in the 1920s and 1930s, with some fascinating contributions in various issues, in various philosophical parts of the philosophical landscape, but again, non-academic. So it's very interesting that this something is missing in Bloch as well. Comes back on this institutional level, but not only on the institutional level. It's very difficult to work with Bloch's texts, again, due to this rest, to this trace, to this remnants of something we do not really capture. We cannot capture till the end. Bloch's texts cannot be appropriated fully. They cannot be consumed. Like, what is the summary? One friend of mine who worked in a consulting company once sent me a letter asking me, well, could you give an executive summary of Heidegger? An executive summary being, it's a consultant term. Executive summary is something which is given to the executives by the consulting companies. Really, one sheet of paper where everything is condensed. Now, with Bloch, even this, this is of course not possible, but there is a feeling of, after reading Bloch, there is a feeling of dissatisfaction still. And I don't think that existing critiques, including the one of Jonas, fully capture the deficiencies of Bloch's work. For I think there are deficiencies, and there are some obvious deficiencies, including political deficiencies. But I think that this is the nature of Bloch's thinking. It evades a full articulation. That's something which I think is important to know. When I first met Bloch's text, I was fascinated by this style, but again I was fascinated by this lack of full comprehension. I think it's important when we talk about Bloch and Bloch's texts. Now, I just want to highlight several important things of dealing with Bloch. First of all, Bloch's thinking invites us to link it to a wealth of contemporary approaches in philosophy and political theory. I just give you one example. Something which is not really worked out in my book. You know that there is, in the last 5 to 6 years, there is a very fashionable movement in continental political philosophy, leftist political philosophy. It's called accelerationism. And the basic claim being that one has to accelerate the movement of capitalism and the movement of capitalist system for the system to collapse, basically, to finish itself, to kill itself by its own logic. Now, it's of course it's a very strange to find the correspondences. If we, with some effort, we could find correspondences everywhere. But nevertheless, let me just cite a passage from The Spirit of Utopia, in the beginning of The Spirit of Utopia. We must surely think busily, industrially, for in this breathless pace, in this acceleration, disquiet, and expansion of our sphere of activity, great spiritual and intellectual works are latent, end quote. This perspective, embracing the new technology rather than simply rejecting it, trying to find inclusively, very inclusively, trying to find utopian forces even in the very new, brand new technological developments, trying to hasten, to speed up the apocalyptic movement. This is one of the very important themes in The Spirit of Utopia. We see, of course, this perspective, accelerationist perspective, prefigured. That's only one example. I could give you some more of that. I also think they are very important. But this is something which testifies how important Bloch's perspectives are today for today's thinking. Now, let me also just state some important points for Bloch's utopian philosophy that we could discuss as well, and which are discussed somehow in my book with much more context, quotations, etc. First of all, I think that Bloch's utopian philosophy, especially the earlier one, is a decisive attempt to rethink the notion of subjectivity, of what Bloch calls Innerlichkeit, or inwardness so the directedness into the inner world. This new focus on subjectivity created or precipitated the new ethics. And this is something I think which is very important, because utopia itself, by thinking of utopia, we think ethically. Utopia is an ethical notion, and by thinking utopia, we bring the ethical or normative dimension into the natural, into the realm of the natural and the social. We envisage the world as it should be. And the very act of this envisioning brings us to consider to reconsider our ontology as well. So it's something where when ethics gets an ontological dimension. And the whole ideas of the darkness of the life moment, of the openness, inherent openness of the universe, of this utopian universe, the experiences of wonder, the experiences of surprise, of uncertainty, are not to be separated from the whole utopian ethical perspectives, and I think they are very productive today. Another issue is an intersubjective issue of the utopian community, which is now revived in many ways in such authors as Badiou and Agamben, of course. Bloch, from the beginning, speaks of the new community to come. And this new community is modeled as a substitute for the Führertum, for the spiritual leadership, which was a very important theme in some circles in the German philosophy in the post-war or pre-First World War times. This focus on the Innerlichkeit, on subjectivity, on the very existential notion of the I, of the self, is from the beginning formulated as Bloch calls it Wir-Problem, we problem. So the problem of us, the problem of intersubjectivity, the problem of collectivity, of what a utopian collective can look like. And here, of course, we have all kinds of new problems and tensions. I also tried to capture in my book. The first and the obvious one being the key ethical tension between universalism and particularism. If utopia is something which is happening in the depths of human soul, then how can utopian meanings, utopian values be intersubjectively articulated? Where does the universality come from? This is the key question of ethics. Where does the universality of ethical principles come from? And in Bloch, it's very much, especially in the earlier work, it's very much mystical issue. He talks about Kant in mystical terms, that the Kantian postulates are given to us like we feel at once that they're right. Ethics is something which I feel, which gives me absolute evidence of this. Ethical postulate is something which has not to be deduced, which is something which has not to be proven for Bloch. But that's the problem, of course, because we have to answer the question, where does this intersubjective stability of ethical principles come from? And this is the question. I mean, we could trace it back to Kant, of course, and then to Rawls, Amartya Sen, all kinds of ethical debates today. they are still here. And you think about, I don't know, whatever, metaphysical interpretation of the Greek tragedy. It's the same thing. Tragedy is specifically a conflict between the individual nature and the universal or state or whatever. The paradigmatic notion of tragedy, of ancient tragedy, is precisely the conflict between the particular and the universal. And there were, of course, a lot of solutions. For example, a Hegelian one, something which professed, by the way, by Rosenzweig as well, so that the agent of the universal is not a human being, but also not a state, but a religious community. But again, there is, of course, the problem of the alienation of the individual within a community. So all kinds of problems. We know of them, of course, but they in Blochian context they get specific coherency, relevance, and a certain focus.
And displacement too.
Yes, in a way. The third point I wanted to say is that the early texts of Bloch are permitted with the notion of the messianic instability. And this messianic instability is precisely what Agamben talks about in The Time That Remains, in his commentary on the Romans. The messianic time, is characterized by an extraordinary intensity, by something which, by the time which is saturated with the future, as Rosenzweig would say, and which is in fact precluding us to be satisfied by the current, by the status quo, by the current events, by something which is here and there, which is given to us. This attitude, this utopian, basically utopian attitude of the fundamental instability, of the fundamental malleability of the universe, that everything can be changed at once, is something which is key to the utopian sensitivity Bloch proclaims. Which is even more important, I think, and which links Bloch to Benjamin, is the idea of some small displacement. You remember this old rabbinic tale recounted by Schollem and then taken up by Bloch. It was very important for Bloch, even I think more important than for Schollem, because for Schollem it was something which, like something marginal, like an anecdote. That to change the world, to hasten, to bring the Messianic kingdom, one had to change a very small detail, but no one knows what one. I could move the bottle, and then the Messianic kingdom would come. But it can also, I can fail, of course, and it cannot come as well. So, but the idea is that we have to be vigilant, to be aware of some very small displacements in our universe that can prove decisive. And this is something I think Deleuze called mineur, something which is minor, which is not conspicuous, which is not that visible as other things are. And this is the strategy Bloch follows in his traces, in his book of prosa, and this is of course the strategy of Walter Benjamin, the lifelong strategy, intellectual strategy of Walter Benjamin. Very interesting in all these contexts is the theory of the so-called inconstruable question, which again brings us back to the postmodern links of Bloch. I was referring today to this transcendence without the transcendent. But in fact, if you think that the same structure comes back in Derrida, in Messianity without Messianism. Lyotard again, yes, yes. And the very idea that the question cannot be construed beforehand, that we have to pose the question as a pure question, something Bloch explicitly states in his Spirit of Utopia, that we have to ask questions without prefiguring the answer. For when we prefigure the answer, we miss the whole point of questioning. The same thing was claimed by Walter Benjamin in his theological political fragment, radically separating the kingdom of the Messiah with the kingdom of history, saying that the Messiah is absolutely separated from history, external to history. But this again creates very important tensions and paradoxes, which are somehow, I would reiterate them a bit later. So that's quite an overview of the problems which I think are key to understanding the utopian philosophy, in particular utopian philosophy of history as it is presented in Bloch. But of course it creates some problems which are not resolved, which are not at least unambiguously resolved in Bloch. The key question of ethics is the question of human action. What should I do? And Benjamin's perspective, and in partly Bloch's perspective on messianism, is very problematic to be when we try to make it compatible with some ethical principles. There was a popular idea at that time in Buber, in Rosenzweig, we find it even in Cohen, the idea that the human being participates in the redemption process. That whether we were talking about religious thinkers or non-religious thinkers, the human participates in history, and it depends on the human action whether the Messiah comes or not. But so that the man and a God somehow co-create the universe, co-create the movement of history. And that was quite clearly the ethical attitude, the ethical purpose of founding the human action in this messianic context. But the problem is that when we radically separate the messianism from the human action, then we lose the foundations for ethics. And vice versa, when we invest human action into the messianic philosophy, the very idea of Messiah, as Benjamin will teach us, loses its radical force. For Messiah becomes just a moment in our own enterprise, which does not change anything radically. There is no radical change they wanted to precipitate, they wanted to create, to have, so to say. A similar, a bit different, but a similar paradox comes up when we speak about the problem of temporality, of utopian temporality. This was one of the key issues in the Jonas critique of Bloch on the loss of presence. That the present is lost in the utopian in favor of the future. And there are two kinds of answers to this problem, to this tension, because the tension does exist. Well, the tension is like this. I lose the present by thinking about the future. But when I concentrate on the present, I lose future, in a way, because I cannot really see the historical dimension of the presence. You remember this quote from Jonas, when he describes his artistic experience. Well, that's very key, that's great, but that brings you out of time and out of history. This experience of the eternity in a single moment, this present of a Kierkegaardian Augenblick, instant, is something Bloch also tries to develop. The idea is something he also tries to develop, but it lacks the historical dimension in it. Otherwise it wouldn't be the thing it claims to be. So that's the tension. And one of the ways to resolve it, again, would be, well, Bloch would say, you criticize me for forgetting the present in favor of the future. But there is nothing to forget, because we don't have a present. The present is not given to us. It's not something which can be taken. It's not something you can take from us because we don't have it. We don't have a full present. Instant or Augenblick or the presence is not present, is not fully present for us. That's the key Blochian answer. That's one way of thinking about this. And another way is precisely this very artistic experience Jonas refers to, but, well, reinterpreted in a Blochian way. And this is one of the key messages of my book, that basically all these tensions, some other tensions as well, are resolved in Bloch by writing a literary text. That in literature, for example, the tension between the subjective and objective gets resolved. We are reading Madame Bovary, and that's the story of Madame Bovary. In a way, that's a particular story, a very specific story of France of the 19th century, of a particular story of a woman in province, etc., has an affair. But at the same time, we see the universality here. If we didn't see this universality, this humanity of this woman, the significance of this particular story, it wouldn't be literature. It would be a document, etc., but that's literature. It is elevated to this level of the literary work because it is given the universality of a masterpiece, of a literary masterpiece. So that's, I think, the reason why Bloch is so literary, why he tries to make this text appear in a certain specific style. Spirit of Utopia starts with the words "vie nous," which can be translated in French like "et encore" or something like this.
Pas encore.
Non, pas encore. Vie nous. Vie nous. Vie is how.
Comme.
How. Comme.
Comment?
Comment. Et comment.
Et comment?
Et comment? I don't know how it's translated in this standard French edition, but anyway, it's very strange. It's very strange. It begins with this question which immediately brings us this dynamic dimension of utopia, this dynamic way of flux that we are immediately taken by this, taken into this movement. We are asked, we are somehow like this is a communication. That's what the Germans call Ruf. Appel. We are appelés in a way by the first words, and all kinds of sketches in the traces are built like this. They bring us a certain experience that is at the same time subjective and objective, that unifies them without a schematic unification, as Hegel would do. But of course, and this is another issue, Bloch could not resist the temptation of building a system. And the later Bloch is a system is a systematic philosophy, is a clear ambition to build a system, an ontological system, in Tübinger Anleitung, in Experimentum Mundi, and in Prinzip Hoffnung as well, of course. And Adorno was the one who was uncomfortable, who tried to retain this energy of the utopian, of the earlier Bloch, by separating this from the later work. You know perhaps the story that when it came to publishing Prinzip Hoffnung in German by Surkamp, the Surkamp himself, Peter Surkamp, one of the founders of the Surkamp, the founder of the Surkamp Verlag, addressed to Adorno to review, as a peer reviewer, as the sole peer reviewer possible for Bloch, the sole real critical theorist who could really assess whether it is good or bad. And Adorno was, I wrote the letters, they are published, by the way. The letters of Adorno to Surkamp, saying that, please do not tell Ernst about my opinion, because we want to stay friends, and we are friends. But it's too long. It's too long. The thought, the critical thought needs a concentration, and it's a bit too much for the philosophical work. And generally, I mean, that's not that. It's again, he doesn't speak directly, but you see the indirect attitude, which is not you know, like this is something. I mean, Adorno never had any attitude like that to no one philosopher, and even to Benjamin, from whom he has taken most insightful things from Benjamin, of course. So it's not the criterion of judging whether it's an ingenious philosophy or not, but there is a problem, of course. There is a problem because this later schematic constructions of Bloch, of this not yet being and all kinds of not yet conscious, of classifying various sorts of conscious, they are somehow, they serve as an introduction to what Blochian perspective is about. They are very propedeutically helpful, but the question remains whether they are philosophically tenable today, and or whether there is something's missing in them, which can be regained by reinterpreting Bloch or linking him and his perspectives to those of the others. I think this is basically all the important things I wanted to say, and I would be glad to respond to any questions. Yeah.
I have a question, since it regards the relationship between present and future. So the issue you were discussing some minutes ago. And I agree with you that there is this duality, and if you concentrate on the one, you lose the other, and the other way around. Unless, and this is something I believe Jonas tries to address, and I would like to know how, if and how, as well, Bloch addresses the same issue. So unless what manifests itself within presence is something which has a sort of a dynamics of the promise. In this case, you could keep together, present and future. So, which is, in other words, in more methodological words, the relationship between phenomenology and ontology. But, if the category, which is, of course, it has religious background, but it can also be used with, apart from a religious grounding. So if the symbol, because you also talked about this very interesting. So why literary works and artistic works somehow, because they are symbols of something, and so I see in the symbol something which can be understood as a promise. And in this case, you can keep together what can usually sound like a contradiction, because the experience of promise, is something which has also an anthropological relevance, and so to full disclosure, I think that the thinking of Hans Jonas is an attempt to answer this question. So what's a promise I perceive in the present, and which is not only reducible to what I see?
Yes, in fact, this is what Rosenzweig as well means, and what Bloch in this Jewish chapter in The Spirit of Utopia also tries to convey, that the Jews
really speak about promise.
Not about promise, but about about the Jews as a nation which lives in its common life by this promise of the Messiah. That's something which that's something which I think is quite prominent in this short piece. The problem, which I also try to think about, to talk about, is that the Jewish thinkers, and presumably predominantly Scholle, did not like this piece very much, because it somehow merged Judaism and Christianity, and talked about Christ living as something which is implicit in the Jewish religion, something they could not accept. It was Buba who could accept that.
And Jonas also.
Perhaps, yes.
But it was closer to the Hasidic movement.
Yes, which for Scholle it was unacceptable.
Yeah.
And that's why he somehow convinced Benjamin that Bloch's book is a failure. And there is, there is a review of Benjamin, who wrote a review of Spirit of Utopia, but this text is lost. And so a lot of scholars try to reconstruct what could have been written there in this extensive review, because he worked a long time on it. But if we try to come to your question about this promise idea, yes, Bloch calls it symbolic intentions. It's very strange. Symbolic intentions, very strange term. Also somehow with the phenological background, dating back to Bloch's own phenological background. So something in this word which refers to another one. But again, the idea is that what is your experience? What does it look like? Is it an experience of the present, which is not completely clear to us, which has to be enlightened, which has to be, the darkness has to disappear, something which is not transparent should become transparent, now, here and now, and we have these flashes of transparency suddenly emerging within the present.
Like memories.
Yes, mémoire involontaire, in a way, yes. It's also important because, for example, this déjà vu issue, it was also very important for Bloch. Because déjà vu, the phenomenon of déjà vu, he comments on Tic, on the Blonde Eckbart, a very important short story by Ludwig Tieck, classical in German literature, where the issue is déjà vu. He has this Bilder des déjà vu, the pictures of déjà vu, a short essay, where again this idea refers to the instability of the present, to something, to the idea of shaking the stability of our present temporality, of the temporality of the present. Now, one thing is when you really concentrate on this presence, as presence. Another way is to think of presence as a promise, as something which refers to the future, because promise is something which is saturated by the future. You're talking about the future, not about now.
Or by the past, because a promise
Yes.
is about the contract in the past.
Yes,
also.
yes, yes. Something which unfulfilled promise.
You're using the terms objective, subjective, intersubjective, and maybe transcendental when you're talking about religious beliefs and so. We are interested in the work of Davidson, a new epistemology and Ken Wilber, who says we have not one utopia, we have a mix of those four utopias, and they have all their own rules of behavior. I mean, you have the rules of behavior or the laws of nature, they're objects. You have the rules of behavior of the subject. You're talking about the self, the ideal of, and intersubjective. We have then a whole world where, like Castoriadis said, we are imagining the world like we want it to be, but it's only a conventions between us. And then, of course, you have the religious appeal, and those four worlds are mixing together, and we are also confusing permanently all those four utopias. Is that not a way, like Davidson says and Ken Wilber says, to approach reality from a better point of view?
Well, I don't know. I'm not very much aware of this work, but again, I mean, these notions are very old. These notions are very old, and they are always used when we try to grasp. Well, so in the context of social philosophy, or philosophy of history, when we try to grasp what history is about, what our society is about. So it's not that original to talk about subjectivity, objectivity, or intersubjectivity, or whatever. For Bloch, for our context, Bloch is not that explicit about that in the beginning. What I should say was that there was a certain shift in his thinking. And the key work there was Lukács and his history of the class consciousness, which talked about proletariat as a subject-object of history, as a class, encapsulating, embodying the objective, the work of history. So a particular group of people in which the history is concentrated in a way. It was a clear Hegelian move. And that was the reappropriation of Hegel, which was a key to the development of Bloch's own ideas. That the very idea of dialectics, of course, applied to the social realm, was productive. Or Marxist dialectics, for that matter. And the development of Marxism in the 20th century was really shaped by these concepts. And this would give you all kinds of answers pertaining to subjectivity, objectivity, and intersubjectivity, because it's really about that, about their connections and about their dialectical, speculative relationship, about their entanglement, as one wishes to say.
There was a Buddhist thinker who was talking last week here about la production combinée. He pretended that all those factors are combining with each other. It's a kind of Heraclitean view of interactions in the big flow.
Maybe un extrait qui va illustrer un petit peu ce propos, parce que on ne lui donne pas beaucoup la parole. C'est dans cette conférence, dans le fragment qui s'appelle « Théorie de la connaissance motrice fantasmatique », il nous parle, en fait, du débat de Goethe sur les couleurs avec Newton, et il nous dit « Plus difficile qu'en histoire est la situation de la physique, et elle est au pire avec la théologie et la métaphysique théologique desséchée en sciences particulières. Nous ne savons pas ce qu'est le jaune ou le bleu, ce qu'est un éclair en tant que tel, car les concepts physiques ne sont identifiables ni à leur porteur invisible, ni à leur loi comparative tirée de la série de processus jadis présents, mais désormais non perceptibles. Nous savons encore moins comment appréhender les promesses religieuses, c'est-à-dire les contenus éloignés d'un présent caché dans le futur. Et donc, c'est ça son problème avec la promesse. Il continue, dès lors, le maintenant du monde, plein de couleurs dans son flux, et c'est héraclitéen comme vocabulaire, si je puis dire, dépendent de nous, reste fragile et impropre à une autre fonction que celle tout au plus privée et relativiste de la théorie des valeurs. Et c'est ça son problème. Ce n'est que relativiste. Nous utilisons certes le langage humain pour exprimer les résultats des sciences particulières, mais ce qui s'y fait connaître n'est que la vérité des faits, indifférente à l'esprit humain et auquel rien ne correspond quant à la valeur. La science détruit ce à quoi nous avons part, elle arrache les racines, tandis que l'art développe les potentialités et que la philosophie intègre au sujet ultime ce qui ressort ici de l'ensemble. Voilà. Ça me semble résumer la question. Et Hannibal a une question.
Oui, tu parlais de déficience. What's on the deficiency of Bloch's system? Which deficiencies do you find in Bloch's system?
Well, there are a lot.
For example, but
I can give you one very important example.
Yes.
Very important example, which I think we never mentioned. Never mentioned this. And in fact, this is also a historical example because it pertains to Bloch's biography and to Bloch's intellectual history in a way. It is well known nowadays that Bloch also had his own black notebooks, and these black notebooks are his papers he wrote on the occasion of Moscow processes, Stalinist processes. It was 1936 till 1938, in which he explicitly approved of Stalinism. And even later in the Principle of Hope, there are references to Stalin with quite approving. And I think he didn't even put them out in the subsequent editions. He just left it as it is, as a historical document. Unlike the political papers, which he heavily edited for the volume of his collected works, and there was a scandal in the 70s. I think during Bloch's lifetime, even there was a scandal when they saw that the texts are different. And in fact, it's a problem for the Bloch scholarship. You cannot rely, if you want to do a work on Bloch. I understood that during writing my book, I think, so it was not really taken seriously by myself, perhaps not seriously enough, although yeah, I did consult previous editions, but now if you really want to read Bloch, you have to understand that you cannot fully rely on the collected works, because these collected works were edited by Bloch and by his students, and he had a tendency to constantly rewrite, like Baudelaire also was crazy about rewriting his verse and never could really achieve the final version. The same was with Bloch. He was constantly rewriting his texts. And there was a volume of the political papers, one of the 12th, I think, or 11th volume of his Gesamthauskauf. It was rewritten, and some issues were taken out of it, some passages, and then there was a scandal, and they finally edited a full version as it was published in the newspapers, in the journals at that time, and that was awful. And this, I should say, cannot be attributed to the lack of knowledge at that time, because knowledge was readily available. It was not about no one knew, like the people said, we didn't know about Nazi, we didn't know we were leaving behind.
Even Sartre at the same time.
Yes, the same thing. And that cannot be also, that can be attributed, of course, to some strategic issues. One has always this strategy of justifying this approval of Stalinism by saying, well, we had Hitler, and there was the only power in the world who could oppose Hitler, and that was Stalin, and we had to somehow...
and we do the same today.
Yeah, we do the same today. That's another story. But just think of it. In 1938, after all the massacres and awful processes of the Stalinist time, after it has become absolutely clear for every sober political observers that Stalinism was a murder. Bloch is writing that everything's okay, and that we have to approve Stalin is moving in the right direction. And but in 1939, Stalin undersigns the pact with Hitler, and they take Europe. They overtake the whole Europe. This is what is it? How should we judge? How should we think about that? And of course, why was it possible? Because of course in the utopian philosophy there is this tendency of absolutization. There is this idea of, well, overemphasizing like schematic, believing too much in the schemas of your political thinking.
It's the Hegelian part.
Somehow, yes, and it was Lukács. Lukács, of course, approved. Lukács approved the same thing. Even worse, I should say. Lukács was even worse in a way because he really took part in the murders in the 20s. It was well known. And in the 30s, he was a loyal Stalinist. That was clear. And he chose Bloch. That's the bad thing about Bloch. Something which I can give Lukács more credentials at this point, because Lukács went to the Soviet Union, and Lukács was on the brink of being killed. He was saved by chance by some Soviet philosophers. He spent 2 or 3 months in the prison, in the NKVD prison. Whereas Bloch went to the West. He didn't want to go to the East. He didn't see there this realized utopia. He did return to Eastern Germany, but that was another story.
But is that not a total denial of the democratic thinking then?
He did. No. I don't think so. He did retain this.
Stalin was not a Democrat.
Stalin was not a Democrat.
But
So it was not.
He approved him.
Yes. This is how it looks like. I mean, yes, we could say many other things about many other thinkers, but this is the real contradictions we as honest intellectual historians have to face to fully account for what utopian philosophy and all kinds of philosophy were like in their historical past. To have the documents, which are not very much researched, by the way. It's still an open. There are a lot of open questions pertaining to the ideology, and to Bloch's biographies and to all these ideological clashes in the 20s, 30s, and later. And well, I should say that in the 60s and in the 70s, Bloch was extremely progressive. and he took very important, he made very important points at that time that were really the attempts to thrive, to help democracy coming into Western Germany. And something I should say, some important things I should say. There was a critique by Bloch, a very interesting critique by Bloch, written by a conservative sociologist, Helmut Schelsky. Schelsky was one of the key post-war, one of the founders of the post-war German sociology. He was Nazi, of course, in the 1930s, and he even wrote some Nazi texts, but he somehow resigned from his Nazi past and became a very important figure in the German academic system. He founded the Bielefeld University, where Luhmann was subsequently teaching. So it was really, in the history of sociology, Helmut Schelsky plays a very prominent role. And he's written a book called Die Hoffnung Blochs, Kritik der Philosophie eines Jugendbewegten. Very strange word, eines Jugendbewegten. So someone who's moved by youth. Not someone who's moving the youth, but who's moved by youth. And there he was criticizing very much along the lines of Jonas, the principle of utopia, and saying that, well, utopia is very clearly has totalitarian tendencies. Then in thinking of utopia, you forget the principle of reality, and he opposes, whereas Jonas opposes to the principle of hope, the principle of
experience.
No, the principle of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And he gives us the principle of experience, and saying that, well, you have to stuck to the real in order to be consistent. But there is again something in Bloch completely overlooked by Schelsky, in part because he never referred to the spirit of utopia. He refers explicitly only to the principle of hope, thinking that this is the only work Bloch being judged by, which is not true, obviously not true. And this dimension is precisely this subjective, existential dimension I referred to in the beginning, completely missing in the account of Schelsky. That utopia is founded in the experience of the I, in the experience of the utopian self. Interiority. Something which he absolutely forgot. And I think this is key to understanding this constant talk of Bloch on the subjective factor, on that there is Natursubjekt, so that the nature has subjectivity in it. Very Schellinger idea, romantic idea, that the nature has this dynamic because it has a subjectivity. It is like a human being, in fact. This whole talk is, we can bring it back to these beginnings of Bloch, to his existentialism in a way, to his redefining the nature of human experience in the utopian view, and trying to bring history into the very subjective, very innermost experience of the soul. The soul is the key term in the spirit of utopia, referring to this. I hope this answers something with your question. Sorry for talking so long.
Yes, perhaps it's a question for us about the very notion of concrete utopia, because at first when we read Bloch, it seems as a response to abstract utopia and all its totalitarian misdemeanors, etc. But then you see that he himself could not articulate his own project of concrete utopia, because it's founded on a theoretical inventivity, and perhaps there is not enough theoretical inventivity so-called system, because I'm not sure it's a system. Because when you read his essays on the essay or his essays on tragedy and drama, you see that he resents systematicity, and it's a theoretical choice. Because he's afraid of reification of his thought. And then history shows him that even when you want utopia to be concrete, then you have to reify it in a kind of political system somehow. And then you fail again. But he's not afraid of failing. That's what saves him somehow. And perhaps that's why he doesn't take off all his stupidities he wrote in this period. Because he thinks, that's part of the process. Of course, since I can only have fragments, I cannot have a totalizing view of what truth is, because the truth itself is a process. So I'm allowed to make mistakes somehow. That's what defines the dignity of humanity too. And that's why it's important to think the equation he makes between time and utopia. Because if it's time, that it cannot be an essence, it cannot be a concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in 1961, when he fled, he had this Eintrittsrede, this. I think that France also has this tradition of the speech when the professor comes to his post first, and then has to deliver a speech. And his speech was entitled, "Can Hope Be Betrayed?"
Can hope be betrayed? Yes.
Kann die Hoffnung enttäuscht werden? And his answer is, of course. And it was, it had a very existential meaning, because his own hope in Eastern Germany was betrayed. And it was really somehow, in Germany it had an enormous, there was an enormous, outrage, public outrage, that the most important, the single most important Eastern German philosopher flees to the West. It was really something awful for the Eastern one, and very ambiguous on the part of the Western one. Why should we need this Marxist here? And I think that one could draw another helpful parallel. Think of the model of community proclaimed by Jean-Luc Nancy. This is the inoperative, not the recent one, the classic one. Inoperative community, communauté des œuvres. With the notion of exposure, of being exposed, exposé. That's something which Nancy tries to conceptualize, saying that, well, the real community is the community of the exposed, the community of those who can fail.
The vulnerable, the
vulnerable, yes,
the
absolutely.
outcasts. Yes.
And that's clear. I mean, the human life itself is vulnerable, so it's very understandable. In a way, what Nancy tries to convey. And I think this is something which is also present in the utopian community as it is conceived by Bloch. I think there is a forceful connection between this. Not, I mean, of course, not explicit connection with these projects, but one can really think, one can really trace, also make the line from Bloch with his critique of Hegel, and with his critique of what Nancy would call immanentism, of this community which is somehow kinds of community which produce themselves, which is communauté œuvrée, community of productive communities, or operative community which produces itself in speculative or dialectical logic, and the community as it is proposed by Nancy, breaking this logic. If you remember about what Bloch says in The Spirit of Utopia on Hegel, of his critique of the Hegelian notion of recollection, of his model of the inconstruable question, then you see very clear how this pattern of thought is taken up and developed further by Nancy.
And Deleuze also.
Yeah, of course.
Question?
In this case, the question is the same question that we can address for IT, because the question of how to produce this kind of community, how this community can be sustainable, how it can be stable.
It shouldn't be stable. I'm not Nancy to answer this question, but
It's the same, so it's the same question to Bloch.
yes, of
So
course.
once this utopia is achieved, how it can be sustained.
That's the question. What does it mean to achieve utopia? This is something we discussed with Jonas' critique of Lowe in this festival. Yeah? In utopia, you expect something which, first of all, you don't know what you expect. Otherwise, you would.
It was not.
Yes.
Utopia.
I quote somewhere this letter from Paul's letter to Romans, saying that hope is not something guaranteed. If it were guaranteed, why would we need hope? It would not be hope if it were somehow determined.
Yeah.
So it's a pure indeterminacy. But if we want to think about that, the problem is that our thinking patterns, our ability to think, needs determinacy, needs fixation. When we are thinking about this, we need to be fixed. And this, I love the model of Walter Benjamin in his translator's essay. You know, this introduction to Baudelaire, to his translation of Baudelaire. When he says that translation is impossible, in fact. Translation is impossible. Pure and simple, a full translation from one language to another is impossible. But as impossible as the restoration of the Adamic language, something this is his important idea, that there was Ursprache, an initial language, but, and this is the most important but, I think in the whole thought of Benjamin, this language is manifest. We can experience it, we can be evidence, see it in the moments of artistic translation, when one language comes to another and we see the correspondences between them. We see how one creative force, one kind of ingenuity, one kind of poetic genius comes close to another one in the translation. When you manage to translate in your own language something which moves other people in other culture, in other languages, and you see this correspondence, this is where the moment when the Adamic language shows up.
And universality.
And universality and utopia, in a way, because it's also utopia. Lost, so to say, lost utopia, never to be regained fully.
Okay, thank you. I think we can... It will make the transition with my reflection on temporality in Walter Benjamin and Bloch. And I will quote, to illustrate what you just said, the 9th thesis on Angelus Novus. Okay? So I'm sorry, je m'excuse, j'ai une déclaration anglaise. A clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something. He is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring. His mouth is open. His wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of its feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. Alors, à partir de cette thèse de Walter Benjamin, j'aimerais réfléchir à la question de la temporalité chez Bloch et Benjamin. Ils se sont nourris mutuellement sur cette question et ça a une dimension très importante dans leur ontologie respective. Alors, c'est donc en référence à ce texte de Walter Benjamin, mais aussi à un autre texte, son texte sur la violence, qui est publié un petit peu avant, que j'adresserai la question de l'utopie de ces deux auteurs, après avoir abordé la question de leur traitement différencié de la temporalité utopique, qui permet pour tous deux néanmoins d'imaginer de manière messianique un horizon de la non-violence entre le sujet et le monde. Alors, bien sûr, ce cercle de Bloch et de Benjamin fait qu'ils partagent des amis communs, Arendt, Schelem, mais aussi, bien sûr, Brecht. Ce qui les situe dans une réflexion sur le temps messianique dans un dialogue hétérodoxe entre le marxisme et le judaïsme, et qui tourne, dans cette époque sombre, autour d'une utopie de l'émancipation qui est révolutionnaire dans sa diachronie même. Et j'insiste sur la diachronie parce que aussi bien Walter Benjamin que Bloch sont, pour aller vite, allergiques à la synchronie et à la dimension fixiste de la temporalité qu'elle suggère. Au-delà de cette amitié ambiguë que je décrirai plus tard entre Bloch et Walter Benjamin, le concept de non-simultanéité chez Bloch, il faut rappeler que pour Bloch, l'histoire n'appartient pas à la sphère de la nécessité. Il y a une dialectique inévitable des marxistes orthodoxes avec les relations de production, mais plutôt, elle appartiendrait au développement d'une conscience qui, contrairement à Fichte ou Kant, ne décrit pas les structures de domination du progrès, mais les structures de libération. Pour Benjamin comme pour Bloch, cette domination est une régression dans le mythe. Le capitalisme est une régression dans le mythe et donne place à la barbarie et à la tyrannie. Car le capitalisme, avec sa naturalisation et sa réification des relations sociales, la conscience anticipante que décrit Bloch, au contraire, ne se satisfait pas de Kant et de sa temporalité critique, qu'il trouve essentiellement chez Hermann Cohen, je pense, car il vise à dépasser le probable de l'aliénation temporelle et du désenchantement nietzschéen. Ou même un autre concept lié à la temporalité avec lequel il est très critique, c'est la notion d'authenticité heideggerienne. Chez Bloch, la conscience humaine est ontologiquement anticipative. Ce n'est pas un choix, c'est ce que Lévinas appellerait une conscience non intentionnelle. L'homme n'a pas le choix. Il le doit par les événements de la faim, par les événements de la catastrophe, dirait Walter Benjamin. Et dans chaque moment, il y a une possibilité de nouveau ou de natalité, dirait Arendt. Et Bloch tente de montrer que le temps est égal à l'espoir. Espoir que les rêves diurnes du passé rendent réalisables. C'est ainsi que le livre « L'esprit de l'utopie » est déjà une critique du marxisme dans ce sens, de son austère économisme, de son déterminisme technologique qu'il trouve réducteur. Ce qui intéresse Bloch, c'est d'explorer la source du désir de libération chez l'homme, qui fait que l'histoire ne serait pas que la sphère de la nécessité. La conscience anticipante est proposée comme moyen de transcender l'immanence, ou comme une possibilité de bifurcation du désenchantement. Mais il y a paradoxalement une forme d'ontologie essentialiste dans cet espoir, lorsqu'il la réduit à une croyance, qu'il réduit à une croyance la question de la temporalité, mais aussi, dans son lien à Adorno et Benjamin, précisément, dans la tension qu'il élabore dans sa théorie du temps et de l'autre chez Hegel. Thématique qui sera reprise d'ailleurs par Lévinas dans Le temps et l'autre, qui cite explicitement Bloch. Donc, pour lui, le temps est une forme de nécessité, d'un dévoilement, d'un processus rationnel qui conditionne bien sûr la Aufhebung, telle qu'elle existe chez Hegel, mais qui crée aussi une tension entre sa métaphysique du temps et la crise du sujet moderne, qu'il met en scène que Hegel met en scène dans la philosophie de l'esprit. Alors, chez Nietzsche, on trouve un nihilisme actif, qui est certes incapable de résoudre le problème auquel on est censé répondre. Heidegger, lui, fait un lien entre une rationalité instrumentale moderne et l'ennui que provoque la succession des maintenant, dans la thèse 87, dans le fragment 87 de l'être et le temps, qui empêche précisément un engagement dans la signification. Et ça, c'est une lecture aussi que Lyotard fera de Heidegger. Et pour Bloch et Benjamin, le temps de la modernisation est vide. Et il est vide pourquoi? Parce qu'il est homogène. Et ce que Bloch développe dans son utopie concrète, c'est une relation du sujet à une forme immanente de transcendance, comme on l'a dit tout à l'heure, qui permet à la temporalité de se faire critique sociale. Car il faut, nous dit-il, une forme d'altérité, une extériorité pour que surgisse l'événement du novum, qui ne peut jamais être déterminé a priori. Donc on a une philosophie de l'extasis, qu'on trouve déjà chez UCL, et on peut dire que les poquets, c'est aussi une forme d'extasie. Okay. Alors que lorsqu'on pense à l'analyse du tableau de Klee, Angelus Novus, dont je viens de décrire, de lire la thèse 9, dans la théorie, les thèses de Philosophie of History de Benjamin, on a l'impression d'abord que Benjamin serait plus proche d'Heidegger, parce que l'ange, effectivement, va vers le futur en regardant à l'envers. Tant que le dos de l'ange regarde vers le futur, Benjamin suggère que nos temporalités historiques s'opposent à l'idée de projection ou de télos vers l'avenir. Et c'est son problème majeur avec Bloch, c'est de se dire il faut regarder la catastrophe en face, finalement. Et comment regarder la catastrophe en face si l'ange ne peut plus ouvrir ses ailes, les ailes de l'histoire. Et donc, quand l'ange est propulsé dans l'histoire, nous dit-il, il regarde en arrière. L'ange ne voit pas l'enchaînement des événements dans leur synchronie. Parce que l'ange est capable, lui, justement, d'articuler l'instant. Il comprend l'instant comme une articulation de moments. Et le temps de nos existences ne s'améliore pas avec le temps pour Benjamin. Donc il n'y a pas de projection vers un futur qui serait mélioriste, comme nous l'avons chez Bloch, parce qu'il refuse l'idée naïve de progrès, mais on verra que Bloch aussi, d'une certaine manière, quand il pense la technique, il la pense contre la naïveté d'un progrès purement technique. Mais dans la métaphore du tableau de Klee, on nous présente le temps comme étant réduit à des débris, et la fonction du sujet, c'est de resignifier ces débris, ces fragments du temps. Benjamin, lui, nous invite pour cela à regarder en arrière. Car il n'y a pas de document de la civilisation ou de la barbarie, dit-il, et les générations passées pour Benjamin ne nous offrent qu'un faible pouvoir messianique. Et là, on va voir que c'est très différent chez Bloch, parce que lui considère justement que les générations passées ont un pouvoir messianique beaucoup plus grand que les générations futures. Et ça serait intéressant d'y revenir, parce que face à l'effondrement de la croyance en l'universel, la question c'est quelle est la base de l'espoir messianique. Il ajoute l'image de nos ancêtres asservis, qui nous offre plus de motivation que celle de nos petits-enfants libérés, et ça c'est la dimension de la sortie d'Égypte, qui travaille dans l'esprit d'utopie. Parce que la fin est toujours dans un futur qui ne viendra jamais. Et ça, c'est la définition du messianisme hébraïque, parce que messianisme, ça peut être traduit, et c'est traduit d'ailleurs chez Lévinas, par arrachement. Le messianisme, Mashiach, c'est l'étalement et l'arrachement sur la peau, d'une certaine manière. Et donc, il ajoute à cette vision le fait que la fin est toujours dans un futur qui ne viendra jamais, et c'est ce qui conditionne sa signification, parce que si c'était une promesse d'advenu, eh bien, ce ne serait pas une utopie. Ça serait un mythe. Et c'est ce qu'il va dénoncer dans la tragédie grecque, justement, en disant la tragédie, elle est fondée, elle, plutôt sur le mythe. Je ne sais pas si vous avez travaillé cette question, mais je ne me rappelle plus très bien votre position. Donc, ce qui le rend méfiant envers l'utopie, c'est que elle finit toujours dans les débris de la dystopie. Et ça, c'est ce que vous avez évoqué tout à l'heure. Et ça, on le voit déjà dans la thèse 6 de la philosophie de l'histoire de Benjamin. Alors, la thèse 6, je vais lire rapidement. To articulate the past historically does not mean to recognize it the way it really was. It means to seize hold of a memory as it flashes up at a moment of danger. Historical materialism wishes to retain that image of the past, which unexpectedly appears to men singled out by history at a moment of danger. Donc ça, c'est la perspective plutôt catastrophique de Benjamin. Et parce que quand il se pose la question où va le temps, eh bien, pour Benjamin, vers le passé. Alors, si la temporalité a une directionnalité, nous dit-il, elle n'a pas de direction. Elle est irréversible dans le sens où elle nous éloigne du sens selon laquelle il y aurait une possibilité d'aller vers. Chez Bloch, il y a une réversibilité du temps, par la capacité de resignifier les événements du passé. Et la temporalité benjaminienne n'ouvre pas vers le futur, ce qui a des conséquences politiques sur le concept d'universalité et de liberté, car pour lui, le reste est un mensonge. Un mensonge parce qu'on se trompe de concept de vérité pour toutes les formes d'altérité ou de marginalité face à l'histoire du progrès. Parce que nous dit-il, et là je pense que Bloch pourrait être d'accord, le temps du moi ne s'améliore pas avec le temps. Il mène à la catastrophe de la mort individuelle. Donc après on reviendra sur la mort chez Bloch. Puisque l'histoire n'a pas de télos, le futur ne viendra jamais. Et ça, c'est la vision du messianisme qu'il prend de Scholem, mais qu'il tient à maintenir pour que cette temporalité sombre de Benjamin nous évite ce que précisément vous avez dénoncé chez Bloch, c'est-à-dire que l'utopie concrète ne nous mène à confondre utopie et dystopie. Alors, ça part d'une théorie de la subjectivité chez les deux auteurs, c'est-à-dire que le moi est toujours autre que le je. Il y a une séparation entre le self et voilà, le moi et le je, parce que le soi, nous dit-il, ne subit pas de modification. Et ça, on le retrouve, je pense, dans l'ontologie blochienne, parce qu'il est lui-même une modification en processus. Il résulte d'un devenir. Donc, la question autour de cet ange de la temporalité, c'est comment réconcilier la morsure du temps et la joie de vivre l'instant. Alors, c'est une question que partagent plutôt Proust et Benjamin que Bloch et Benjamin. Mais là aussi, il va s'opposer à la réminiscence bergsonienne, qui est extrêmement importante à l'époque, je veux dire, autour de la dimension du devenir et de la temporalité, où temps et temporalité sont précisément séparés, et qui ne permet pas la réconciliation à travers la mémoire, mais, va dire Bloch, autour de la résignation. Et c'est contre le concept de résignation qui va s'opposer à la temporalité à la fois heideggerienne et bergsonienne. Ça va devenir, dans la théorie critique, ce que Foucault appellera l'histoire du présent. Cette histoire critique du comment nous sommes devenus ce que nous sommes. Sans idéologie et sans recours à la conscience malheureuse, parce que Bergson lui assimile le passé, présent, futur à ce qu'il appelle le temps de la relaxation, qu'il oppose à la notion de contraction de l'instant qu'on trouve chez Bloch. Et la notion de contraction de l'instant, c'est une notion messianique et kabbalistique. Hein, c'est ce que je discutais avec Avishai Zafrani tout à l'heure, c'est ce qu'on appelle dans la pensée hébraïque le Ein Sof. Alors le Ein Sof, c'est dans le mot Ein, c'est le rien, c'est le néant, et et le mot sauf est la fin. Donc c'est l'idée que la finalité est impossible, le finalisme est impossible, et c'est la condition du temps utopique. Alors, pour Deleuze, qui lit Bloch, cela relève de la stratégie de la répétition, et ça va devenir un concept très important chez Deleuze, mais Bloch insiste sur la nécessité de valoriser le futur, précisément pour échapper au nihilisme. Donc, il va retourner le regard de l'ange binyaminien d'une certaine manière, en articulant, en ne choisissant pas entre le passé et le futur, mais en articulant le passé et le futur dans l'instant présent. Parce que sinon, nous dit-il, on est enfermé dans une espèce d'ataraxie mélancolique où on ne peut pas agir dans l'histoire. Et la volonté, c'est d'articuler histoire et nature. Ce qui fait, il me semble, écho à la temporalité révolutionnaire chez Bloch, parce qu'elle se construit à la fois contre le déterminisme historique de Marx et le temps de la relaxation chez Bergson. Parce que Bloch repense Marx dans l'esprit de l'utopie, notamment dans l'héritage de notre temps. Et, nous dit-il, si la production capitaliste génère toujours un passé oppressif, qui supprime la possibilité d'une reconfiguration radicale de la sphère sociopolitique, eh bien pour Bloch, elle tente aussi une modalisation de ce qu'il appelle la non-contemporanéité dont on a parlé au déjeuner, et cela contre le présent, car il y aurait une survivance dans le passé d'éléments récalcitrants et irréductibles au capitalisme. Et c'est donc dans ce passé areux signifié, areux fécondé, qu'il est possible de dépasser l'élément réifiant ou mortifère de toute théorie politique. Il en appelle donc à une mobilisation de ces non-contemporanéités en termes de temps a priori contre l'inertie du présent, parce que l'inertie du présent, c'est la soumission. C'est la soumission, c'est pire, je dirais, c'est la soumission volontaire. Et cette position émerge de ces conversations précisément avec Benjamin et leur réinterprétation du temps capitaliste à partir de ces tensions immanentes au temps lui-même. Mais Benjamin ne repense pas seulement le concept de temps révolutionnaire, mais aussi celui de temporalité comme praxis et théoria. On pourrait dire que Marx, Bloch et Benjamin argumentent que si le capitalisme impose une temporalité oppressive à la société, la théorie doit tenter, elle, de rompre cette place afin d'analyser les luttes historiques sans imposer le temps du capitalisme. Et ça, ce n'est possible parce qu'il y a une pluralité de possibles temporels. Donc, comme seule alternative à la résignation, l'utopie concrète de Bloch consisterait à proposer une conception alternative au temps révolutionnaire, car il n'interprète pas la liberté comme une autodétermination rationnelle, mais plutôt la liberté comme étant au service des gens, des créatures corporéisées, des créatures de manque, de besoin, de vulnérabilité. Et il tente, je parle de Bloch, d'articuler un matérialisme capable de prendre en considération à la fois cette finitude humaine du corps et sa capacité de se dépasser. Et ça, j'ai noté bol direct parce que j'ai trouvé aussi cette position dans votre texte. Parce que dans votre lecture de Bloch, l'historicité n'est pas liée qu'à des racines historiques, mais à une spéculation utopique. Bloch et Benjamin ont, dites-vous, tenté de montrer que le passé peut aider à mieux discerner le présent et le futur, contre une idée inadéquate du progrès, en faisant exploser précisément le continuum historique. Car nous sommes d'accord, le progrès et son utopie ne sont pas les concepts importants pour Benjamin, car il s'agit essentiellement d'actualisation, d'actualiser la monade de l'instant qui est fermée mais, nous dit Bloch, qui contient en elle-même la totalité de l'histoire, en tout cas la totalité des possibles de l'histoire. Il opère donc une dénonciation de la continuité de l'histoire pour produire du novum et ne pas se soumettre à la logique des vainqueurs, car il partage partiellement la vision que l'histoire n'est pas déterministe et que le danger des passions révolutionnaires est qu'elles ne finissent par institutionnaliser la violence. Benjamin vise alors l'instant articulé, alors que Bloch, nous dit Ivan Boldirev, et je vous cite, attaque la conception scientifique du temps comme espace transformé. Et ça, c'est quelque chose de très important dans la lecture de Mort par rapport à Bloch. Ce que Bloch apporte, c'est que l'utopie n'est pas spatiale, elle est temporelle uniquement. Il ne suffit pas de souffler sur les cendres de l'histoire, car il n'y a pas de mémoire sans anticipation. Il a tiré la question de la reconnaissance chez Hegel vers quelque chose qui permet cette extasie, c'est-à-dire la question de l'altérité absolue, qu'il articule dans ses premiers textes à des motifs messianiques de résurrection de la chair, mais qu'il s'empresse bien sûr d'inscrire dans une perspective immanentiste. Cela le mène à réviser le matérialisme qui peut prendre en compte l'idée que le non-fini, les débris de l'histoire, dirait Benjamin, n'ont pas disparu pour toujours. Ainsi, la théorie de la non-contemporanéité dans l'histoire réfléchit le pouvoir du passé qui est toujours capable de transformer le présent et de faire advenir une forme de liberté, capable de dépasser notre auto-aliénation et permettre, d'une certaine manière, de viser un temps de l'émancipation qui serait une utopie concrète à partir d'une herméneutique historique du passé qui prenne au sérieux ce paradoxe de l'articulation de l'instant. Donc l'irréductible singularité des circonstances et la reconnaissance d'une structure ontologique lui permet, comme vous le dites, et je vous cite, de construire un palimpseste sur lequel les contours du futur du monde soient déjà inscrits. Et je trouve très important cette métaphore du palimpseste parce que précisément le passé ne nous regarde pas en arrière, il nous regarde devant. Et cette nouvelle forme herméneutique brise la cohérence du temps heideggerien en ce qu'elle défait les formes culturelles stéréotypées. Alors si Benjamin partage cette idée, Bloch le prévient néanmoins du danger d'une fétichisation herméneutique de ces petites choses de l'histoire. Il ne partage certes pas la vision platonicienne de la réminiscence, ni celle de la vérité, parce qu'elle est trop proche, selon lui, justement, de Bergson, voire d'Heidegger, ou de l'idée d'une vérité qu'elle suppose. Bloch va alors montrer comment un nouveau savoir peut surgir par le processus de la pensée, qui crée toujours de nouveaux commencements. Et le messianisme, pour lui, c'est ça, c'est la possibilité de toujours créer de nouveaux commencements, en retournant à l'objet originel, d'où pour Benjamin l'importance du fragment, comme il l'a montré de manière magistrale dans One Way Street. Alors, là il y a une analyse aussi d'Ivan Boldirev que je trouve extrêmement intéressante, qui nous décrit le philosophe comme un détective. Perhaps you can say something about it, because I will...
Well, there are a lot of things, because they all, Brecht, Bloch and Benjamin, all wrote about detective stories, and they were really fascinated by detective stories. And they were interested by different things in the detective stories. But what interested Bloch precisely was precisely these small things.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a good detective story, it is a small thing, an insignificant thing.
That will make...
That is truly decisive
Yes.
for the whole. And if you think again, sorry about that, but I'm always already linking this to the current debates. One of the recent books by Carlo Ginzburg, a great historian, who is equating the work of the historian with the work of a detective, with the work of deciphering the
fragments,
Yes.
making
Rentrer des slides dans le
the slide.
Yes.
Yes,
So we
absolutely.
have the notion of traces et fragments qui s'articulent dans la pensée de Bloch et Benjamin, mais ces notions, ces métaphores, elles fonctionnent contre l'idée de totalité. Hein, c'est ça qui est important pour les deux. Mais elles s'appuient quand même sur les forces messianiques du reste du passé. Et ces fragments, ce sont des restes du passé. Mais un passé, je dirais, qui est quand même assez mythologique dans, je dirais, de la Kabbale et de ces fragments, des étincelles du vase cassé, qui nous permettraient de reconstruire a posteriori un sens à l'histoire, etc. Donc des métaphores qui sont très séduisantes quand on ne connaît pas les textes, mais à partir du moment où on connaît les textes, on se rend compte que leurs vertus émancipatrices sont quand même assez limitées. Bon, donc, et peut-être que là je suis plus lévinassienne parce que y a une dimension d'irrationnel dans ces textes qui est donc assez problématique, mais c'est pourquoi quand Lévinas lira Bloch, il va tout à fait louer sa réflexion sur la mort en disant qu'elle est tout à fait révolutionnaire, mais il disait bon, ben, s'il était talmudiste au lieu d'être kabbaliste, il aurait été un peu plus intelligent. Alors je caricature, mais Lévinas est très méchant avec Bloch. Enfin, je ne sais pas ce que vous en pensez. Et le texte qu'il écrit sur Bloch, qui est un éloge, et néanmoins, ça m'a rappelé un petit peu la première. Oui, ça m'a rappelé un peu la première copie, mon premier travail que je lui avais remis. Alors ça avait l'air très gentil au départ, et puis après c'était un peu effrayant. Alors je peux lire un extrait peut-être, pour pas faire du lachonara, en train de dire du mal sans le prouver.
Il dit basiquement que Bloch il ne connaît pas l'hébreu, qu'il a lu l'Ancien Testament en traduction et qu'il ne connaît que sa culture juive se réduit à quelques légendes hassidiques.
Quelques légendes hassidiques, et alors en plus le chassidisme à l'époque, bon, c'est totalement contraire à la tradition talmudique, c'est la volonté d'en finir avec la catastrophe et de ramener le judaïsme dans l'histoire par la joie. Donc ça c'est contraire à la vérité historique, et surtout ça ne permet pas de lire les fragments du passé de manière pertinente, selon Lévinas. Enfin, donc la question c'est de savoir si c'est une position historique, esthétique ou révolutionnaire chez Bloch. Ce qui rappelle une phrase d'Isaac Babel, assez contemporain, qui dit « La banalité est contre-révolutionnaire ». Et ce marxisme serait banal. Le marxisme serait banal s'il était statique. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'influence de cette littérature d'Isaac Babel sur Bloch, mais je ne peux pas le montrer. Ce qui l'intéresse, c'est que cette nouvelle forme herméneutique brise la cohérence du temps heideggérien et qu'elle défait, comme on l'a dit, les formes culturelles stéréotypées. Donc si Benjamin porte cette idée, Bloch le prévient de la fétichisation, comme on l'a dit, en s'appuyant précisément sur la force messianique des restes du passé. Il reproche donc à Benjamin son manque de dimension utopique, car l'essentiel est qu'il se sépare de cette méthode, de son contexte temporel, et que ça le menace de réification. Bloch doute que la réification du passé puisse être dépassée, et il repense, il refuse, je dirais même, la mélancolie de Benjamin, qui fait qu'il ne peut voir l'utopie que comme un concept négatif. Alors, je voudrais pas analyser le suicide de Bloch comme une preuve de cette position, mais elle risque, pour Bloch, de détruire la polyphonie des possibles dans l'histoire. Et c'est ça qui le dérange essentiellement. Donc, je ne voudrais pas trop développer le reste. Je voudrais insister en disant que la différence est que Bloch cherche des traces de signification qui pourraient transformer le plomb en or. Des rêves diurnes qui font de ce quelqu'un qui imagine et perçoit des améliorations possibles à l'existence humaine ne soit pas un autre nom idéologique qui précède l'histoire et qui conditionne cette signification. Donc la dimension d'étonnement dans l'articulation de l'instant, l'émerveillement pour l'instant, sont pour Bloch les véritables ruptures dans le temps synchronique et l'ennui sans l'esprit de l'utopie. Ce qui explique ces irruptions sur le novum et la notion de non-simultanéité que Bloch utilise déjà dans un essai de 1932 afin de tenter d'expliquer le développement du national-socialisme à la lumière de la Grande Dépression. L'idée primordiale de l'essai étant que l'hétérogénéité des stades du développement économique coexiste simultanément en 1930 à cause d'une modernisation inégale des moyens de production, et il nous dit dès ce moment, tout le monde ne vit pas dans le mal maintenant. Alors, quand on comprend la manière dont la temporalité blochienne constitue aussi son ontologie, et que l'on voudrait le comparer à Binyamin, on se rend compte que Binyamin s'est donné pour tâche, lui aussi, de pourchasser la mythologie qui habite les utopies. Donc ça fait un point commun de plus avec Bloch. Et je dirais ce qu'ils partagent, c'est qu'ils veulent en sauver l'étincelle libératrice. L'utopie serait pour Binyamin ce non-lieu entre le mythe et l'éveil, le fantasme et la pensée dialectique. L'aspiration au nouveau est aussi reprise d'un passé archaïque, et le communisme primitif, ce qu'il appelle le communisme primitif, serait l'orientation vers l'avenir qui s'opère par le détour d'un rapport au passé et un passé le plus ancien. Parce que Binyamin, dans sa tentative de sortir du continuum de l'histoire, c'est-à-dire de la domination, écrit comme Bloch dans son essai sur la reproductibilité technique de 1936, qu'il faut rétablir une harmonie entre nature et humanité. Mais il évoque aussi le catastrophisme révolutionnaire de Blanqui. Et il la lit comme une fantasmagorie de l'éternel retour. La modernité, sous le masque du présent, se dévoile comme la terreur et la catastrophe de la répétition. Un terme qui va devenir généreuse. Donc l'utopie serait un non-lieu de rupture. Et dans le thèse sur les concepts de l'histoire, il défend avec Blanqui l'idée d'arracher au dernier instant, hanté par la catastrophe, le fascisme de l'État totalitaire afin de libérer la force sauvage de l'utopie. Cette thèse de Binyamin propose donc un renversement, un retournement, mettre le présent au centre de la réflexion historique, aborder l'autrefois de façon politique à partir de l'urgence du présent. Alors, son hypothèse se situe autour d'une réflexion sur l'homo politicus, c'est-à-dire l'idée que cette idée de la temporalité n'est pas sans affinité avec l'affirmation par Ernst Bloch d'un foyer ontologique de l'utopie, lié à l'inachèvement de l'être, dont nous a parlé Yvan. Donc, le pas en temps contre le lieu commun de l'idéologie conservatrice qui amalgame utopie et totalitarisme. Abensour, par exemple, affirme que l'utopie, je cite, cette expression imaginative d'un monde nouveau, a partie liée avec l'émancipation. Quand l'utopie décroît, c'est le totalitarisme qui croît. Donc il y aura une vertu de la temporalité utopique comme une prévention, comme je dirais presque oui, outil de prévention, parce que l'utopie est une image dialectique, chez Benjamin comme chez Bloch, et qu'elle favorise l'éveil historique. Et pour qu'elle favorise l'éveil historique, nous dit Benjamin, elle doit être affaire de tous, alors que Bloch, lui, nous incite à penser un pluralisme des projets utopiques. Le temps de l'utopie serait donc le présent comme kairos, comme condition de la liberté qui s'accorde avec l'action. C'est ainsi que, comme le Marx de la célèbre 11e thèse sur Feuerbach, il cherche l'achèvement dans l'action, l'action qui devient une boussole dans le labyrinthe de l'émancipation et qui se fait autour du lien entre temporalité et action. Voilà, je vous remercie. Alors, il ne nous reste plus. Marc ?
Pardon ?
C'est à toi, Marc.
On fait une pause ?
Fais une pause ?
Ok.